13 famous gay celebrities who died of AIDS behind the glitter of Hollywood. Their endings were darker than the roles they once played. Each name hides a secret, each death a chilling reminder of a time when silence was deadlier than the disease itself. Stay with us, because the stories you are about to hear are as tragic as they are unforgettable. Number 1. Perry Ellis. In the spring of 1986, fashion's darling vanished from his own stage. The runways of New York held their breath. Paris whispered in disbelief. Milan tilted its head in suspicion. Then he appeared, gaunt, ghostly, a shadow stitched into his own pastel vision. Within weeks, he was gone, only 46, leaving a silence louder than any applause. Ellis had been the boy wonder, the Southern charmer from Virginia who made American sportswear look like poetry. He dressed presidents, first ladies, movie stars who wanted ease without losing elegance. His suits carried the promise of youth, his sweaters the light of endless summers, his dresses the flirtation of a wink across a crowded room. Critics called him a genius of restraint, a magician of simplicity, a king of cool. The public adored him, the industry envied him, the press anointed him. For a decade, Perry Ellis meant vitality, freedom, and the crisp scent of modern America. But fashion is merciless, and secrets do not stay folded away. The whispers grew louder than the music of his shows. Why did his once athletic frame melt into fragility? Why did his smile tighten? Why did he vanish between seasons? In an era when a single word could ruin reputations, Ellis denied, deflected, carried on. Yet the disease wrote its signature across his body like cruel embroidery. He grew thinner, weaker, paler, until the glittering world that had crowned him now stared in horrified silence. The shock was not only his death, but the swiftness of it. One year he was receiving awards, the next he was gone, erased from the skyline of 7th Avenue. Friends mourned, rivals looked away, admirers clutched their garments as if fabric could shield them from fear. Ellis was not just another designer, he was the embodiment of American optimism, and to lose him so young felt like the country itself had lost a heartbeat. His life ended like a candle snuffed in a gust of wind, sudden, cruel, final. The empire he built survived for a while, but the man behind the label was irreplaceable. Fashion had always promised immortality through style, yet Perry Ellis proved that even beauty cannot outwit mortality. In the end, the runway lights dimmed, the music stopped, and all that remained was the echo of elegance undone. Number 2. Howard Ashman. In the spring of 1991, the Disney Studios announced that their brilliant lyricist would not be attending the premiere of his own masterpiece. The man who had given voice to mermaids, teapots, and dancing candelabras was lying in a hospital bed in New York, a frail figure fading behind curtains drawn tight. Days later, news broke that Ashman was gone at only 40, and the fairy tale kingdom suddenly looked darker than the midnight forest. He had been the magician of words, the poet who spun rhymes into gold. From Broadway to Hollywood, Ashman conjured melodies that made audiences laugh, cry, believe in magic again. He turned simple lines into eternal refrains, the kind children sang on playgrounds and adults hummed on subways. Beauty and the Beast, The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, his fingerprints were on all of them. Playful, tender, unforgettable. He was young, witty, and hailed as the savior who resurrected Disney's musical crown. But behind the glittering curtains, a secret illness was writing its own libretto. In an era when even a whisper of the disease could kill a career faster than any critic, Ashman worked in silence. He wrote songs between treatments, rehearsed lyrics while hiding symptoms, carried the weight of an empire on shoulders that grew thinner every month. His colleagues saw his genius. Few saw his pain. The studio cheered the box office triumphs, while the man behind them shrank away, unseen, unspoken, unsaved. The twist arrived like a sour note in a symphony. As the audience sang along to his words, the man who wrote them was dying in anonymity. Fame could not protect him, applause could not heal him, and the fairy tales he built offered no happy ending of his own. His final days were spent watching from the shadows as his creations lit up the world, a cruel irony that made the tragedy even sharper. When Howard Ashman died, the curtain did not simply fall. It collapsed with a thud that echoed through Broadway and Burbank alike. The man who had taught voices to soar was silenced before his own had fully matured. His legacy remains immortal, but his life was cut short by a truth no song could soften. Number 3. Michael Bennett. In the summer of 1987, Broadway's brightest choreographer was admitted to a hospital in Arizona under a false name, a desperate attempt to escape the glare of headlines. The man who had once commanded the stage with a single snap of his fingers now lay hidden behind drawn blinds, fighting an illness the theater world refused to acknowledge. By July, Bennett was dead at only 44, and the Great White Way lost the man who had redefined its rhythm. He had been the golden architect of dreams, the genius behind A Chorus Line, the show that turned chorus dancers into stars and won 9 Tony Awards. To the public, Bennett was unstoppable, a whirlwind of energy who transformed the stage into a mirror of ambition, sweat, and sacrifice. He made Broadway modern, cinematic, electric. His vision was raw yet polished, daring yet tender, always ahead of its time. For a decade, he ruled the theater like a monarch of movement, dazzling critics, enthralling audiences, and intimidating rivals. But behind the sequins and spotlights, another story was unfolding. Rumors swirled around his declining health, whispered in rehearsal halls and whispered louder at opening night parties. The man who had once leapt across stages now struggled to climb a flight of stairs. He denied the truth, retreated into shadows, hid behind the protective curtain of denial. Yet the disease made its presence known, mercilessly stripping away his vitality until even the gossip columnists fell silent out of unease. The twist came with devastating irony. A man who had spent his career celebrating life, motion, and resilience was felled by an invisible enemy that stilled his body and silenced his voice. Bennett, who had immortalized the dreams of anonymous dancers, became himself a tragic figure, vanishing just as Broadway entered a new golden age that he had helped ignite. His passing was not just the loss of a man, but the extinguishing of a creative fire that had lit an entire generation. When Michael Bennett died, the marquees still glowed, the orchestra still played, the dancers still tapped. Yet the magic felt diminished, the tempo slower, the applause tinged with sorrow. The stage remained, but the master of its heartbeat was gone. Number 4. Brad Davis. In the autumn of 1991, Hollywood awoke to the news that the handsome rebel of Midnight Express had breathed his last in Los Angeles. The actor who once electrified the screen with raw intensity and reckless charm had slipped quietly into death at only 41. The shock was not just his age, but the revelation that he had been carrying a secret heavier than any role he ever played. Davis had been the very image of American defiance. With piercing eyes and a face carved for close-ups, he was the darling of critics and a heartthrob for audiences. Midnight Express in 1978 made him a star overnight, a performance of sweat, fear, and desperate survival that burned itself into cinema history. He followed with memorable turns in chorale and television dramas, proving he was no one-hit wonder. He was the golden boy with a touch of danger, the Southern charmer turned international sensation. Yet behind the smoldering looks and sharp cheekbones, Davis fought a private war. In the sterile corridors of hospitals, far from the camera's flash, he was battling the same disease that had begun to claim artists one by one. Unlike many, Davis refused to vanish quietly. He chose to speak, to admit his diagnosis in a world still ruled by prejudice and fear. It was a confession that shocked Hollywood, where silence was safer and denial the more fashionable costume. His bravery in acknowledging the truth became as much a part of his legacy as the roles he played. The twist was brutal. While he had once been applauded for portraying men broken by circumstances, he himself became the tragic figure. A leading man who should have aged into patriarchal gravitas was instead cut down before middle age, his potential locked forever in celluloid reels. The industry that had celebrated his daring performances turned hushed, uneasy, unwilling to face the storm that had taken him. His wife and daughter carried the sorrow of his absence, while fans were left to replay his films, searching for echoes of the man who had burned so brightly, so briefly. Brad Davis left the screen, but not the memory. His story lingers like smoke in an empty theater, haunting and unresolved. Number 5. Peter Allen. In the summer of 1992, Broadway lights dimmed as the flamboyant showman of Tenterfield Station fame lost his battle in San Diego. The singer who once strutted across stages in sequin shirts and belted anthems of joy was reduced to a frail figure, his voice silenced at only 48. The audience who had adored his sparkle now faced the cruel irony of a life that ended in shadows. Allen had been the quintessential entertainer, a man of piano keys, confetti cannons, and unashamed theatricality. Born in Australia yet embraced by America, he became the toast of cabaret clubs and the darling of Broadway. He wrote songs that shimmered with sentiment, including I Honestly Love You, made immortal by Olivia Newton-John, and the Academy Award-winning Arthur's theme. His charisma was magnetic, his energy electric, his style unapologetically extravagant. He was the man who made excess look elegant and sentiment sound sincere. Yet behind the rhinestones and roaring ovations, Allen carried a secret too heavy for even his strongest ballads. He had lost friends, lovers, colleagues to the same disease. Each funeral, a grim prelude to his own fate. The smile that once dazzled from the stage began to falter, his body shrinking as if applause itself could no longer sustain him. He retreated from the public eye, performing less, disappearing into treatments, watching as the era of disco and cabaret faded without him. The twist cut deeper than any critic's pen. For a man whose very essence was life, celebration, and performance, his decline was unbearably stark. The sequins no longer glittered, the spotlight grew dim, and the piano keys fell silent. To fans, it was almost unthinkable. The exuberant Peter Allen, whose energy once seemed eternal, extinguished by an invisible enemy that spared neither the bold nor the timid. His passing was not only the loss of a star, but the end of a whole style of entertainment, a world of cabaret that died with him. When Peter Allen's final curtain fell, it was not with fireworks or applause, but with a whisper. The flamboyant showman who had danced on tables and serenaded audiences into rapture left quietly, almost humbly, as though even he had grown weary of the masquerade. Number 6. Steve Rubell. In the summer of 1989, the king of disco excess collapsed in a Manhattan hospital, the glitter of his empire now reduced to sterile white walls and hushed whispers. The man who once ruled over Studio 54, that notorious cathedral of hedonism, was gone at only 45. The music had stopped, the champagne bottles were empty, and the velvet ropes hung limp in mourning. Rubell had been more than a nightclub owner. He was a ringmaster of decadence, the puppet master of New York's most extravagant circus. Politicians, movie stars, fashion icons, everyone lined up for a taste of the forbidden fruit behind his doors. With a mischievous grin and a velvet rope in his hand, Rubell decided who was divine and who was denied. He was bold, brazen, and irresistible, the man who turned nightlife into mythology. His name was synonymous with glamour, gossip, and unrestrained pleasure. But beneath the sparkle of sequins and the thunder of bass, a shadow was gathering. Rubell's health began to falter, his once magnetic energy dimming. To the public, he blamed hepatitis, an easier explanation, a more palatable lie. The truth was darker, whispered in back rooms, feared by the very crowd that once worshipped him. The disease that stalked artists and dancers had claimed yet another victim, and Rubell, the ultimate gatekeeper, could not talk his way past this final bouncer. The twist was cruelly poetic. The man who built an empire on bodies pressed close in rhythm and sweat fell victim to the very intimacy his world celebrated. His decline was swift, his passing abrupt, and the empire of Studio 54 became a mausoleum of memories. Once, the lights had dazzled, the drugs flowed, the stars danced. Now, silence reigned where once there had been thunder. When Steve Rubell died, it was not only a man who vanished, but an entire era. The 70s disco dream, with all its shimmer and scandal, lay buried with him. His death was less an epilogue than a requiem, a final encore for a show that could never be revived. Number 7. David Cole. In the winter of 1995, the beatmaker who had filled dance floors across America was carried out of a New York hospital, silent at only 32. The clubs that once pulsed to his rhythms now throbbed with grief, as if the speakers themselves mourned the loss. The voice behind the hits was gone, leaving a void that no remix could ever fill. Cole had been the wizard of the turntables, the prodigy who gave Clivier and Cole their thunderous sound. He produced anthems that dominated radio, ignited MTV, and sent crowds into frenzy. His fingerprints were everywhere: Mariah Carey's soaring tracks, Whitney Houston's dance remixes, and the unforgettable It's Gonna Be a Lovely Day. He was young, brash, magnetic, a genius who made pop feel fresh, dangerous, and deliriously alive. For a brief, blazing moment, he was the heartbeat of 90s dance culture. But behind the neon lights and platinum records, Cole's body was waging war. The illness was kept from the public, whispered only in hushed tones by insiders who feared the stigma more than the disease itself. He hid behind his beats, masking fatigue with volume, burying frailty beneath bass lines. The spectacle was dazzling, but the truth was merciless. The disease tore through him with the same ruthless speed as his meteoric rise. The twist came when audiences realized that the man who gave them joy, liberation, and rhythm was himself consumed by silence. Cole had crafted soundtracks for celebration, yet his own finale was written in sorrow. No encore, no spotlight, no applause, only the abrupt stillness of a life cut short. For his collaborators, it was unthinkable. For his fans, it was a betrayal of fate. For the industry, it was another reminder that talent offers no immunity. When David Cole died, an entire generation of club kids and pop lovers felt the music falter. The man who could turn silence into sound, sound into sensation, had been undone by a silence more permanent than any pause between beats. His records still spin, his remixes still pulse, but the man who made them will never step back into the booth. Number 8. Paul Jabara. In the autumn of 1992, the songwriter who had once commanded the airwaves with disco thunder slipped away in Los Angeles, gone at only 44. The man who had penned Last Dance for Donna Summer and the immortal It's Raining Men for the Weather Girls was suddenly silenced. The music that had once lifted dance floors into ecstasy now echoed with absence. Jabara had been a carnival of energy, a flamboyant figure who blurred the line between stage and spectacle. He won an Academy Award, a Golden Globe, and a Grammy, yet wore them with the irreverence of a man more interested in laughter than laurels. He was Broadway, he was disco, he was glitter and grit rolled into one dazzling package. Friends adored him for his outrageous humor. Audiences embraced his unapologetic joy, and the industry knew him as the unpredictable genius who could spin camp into gold. Yet behind the sequins and soundtracks, Jabara was living a quieter drama. His health faltered, his frame grew frail, his once booming presence shrank to whispers. The club still played his songs, yet the man who wrote them struggled in obscurity. The world that had danced to his creation seemed oblivious to the suffering of their creator. It was the cruelest of ironies. He gave joy to millions, but bore his own sorrow in silence. The twist struck like a sour chord. The man who had written anthems of liberation, who had championed voices of the marginalized and the fabulous, was undone by the very plague ravaging his community. The applause faded, the awards gathered dust, and the glitter he had once thrown into the air came down like ashes. His death revealed the fragility beneath the flamboyance, the sorrow beneath the sparkle, the man beneath the myth. When Paul Jabara died, disco itself seemed to bow its head. His songs still thunder across speakers, still ignite weddings, drag shows, and dance halls. Yet to hear them now is to hear both joy and lament, a reminder of the man who gave the world its soundtrack and paid the ultimate price. Number 9. Tony Richardson. In the winter of 1991, London's gossip pages whispered of a legendary director wasting away behind closed doors. By November, the man who had once collected an Academy Award for Tom Jones was gone at only 63, leaving behind a film legacy rich in daring and controversy. The headlines mourned him, the whispers explained him, and the truth struck like a dagger through velvet. Richardson had been cinema's enfant terrible, the British director who seduced Hollywood with audacity and wit. He gave the screen a taste of honey, the loneliness of the long-distance runner, and of course the rollicking Tom Jones, which won 4 Oscars and reinvented the period piece with lusty humor and brazen style. He was hailed as a pioneer of kitchen sink realism, a provocateur who made social issues cinematic without losing bawdy charm. To the public, he was brilliant, daring, a man who refused to play it safe. But behind the camera's bravado lay secrets too delicate for the tabloids of the time. Richardson's personal life swirled with rumors, affairs, and complexities that made his private world as dramatic as his films. As the 80s waned, His health began to betray him. The whispers grew louder, the denials more brittle, until finally the truth could no longer be masked. The man who had filmed society's taboos was felled by one of the most feared taboos of his era. The twist carried cruel irony. The director who had dared to show audiences reality in all its raw imperfection could not escape his own unflinching finale. To some, it was a scandal. To others, a tragedy. To all, a sobering reminder that genius does not grant immunity. His death cut short a career still capable of reinvention, leaving audiences to imagine the films he never lived to make. When Tony Richardson died, British cinema lost not just a director, but a rebel spirit. His films remained vivid and defiant, but the man behind them was buried with whispers and regrets. The laughter of Tom Jones, the tears of Honey, the grit of loneliness all endure, yet their creator vanished under a silence thicker than any curtain. Number 10. Wayland Flowers. In the autumn of 1988, the voice behind America's most scandalous puppet fell silent in Los Angeles. The ventriloquist who made nightclub audiences howl with laughter through the tart tongue of Madame was gone at only 48. The glitzy puppet survived, but her master was no more, leaving cabaret stages across the country strangely hollow. Flowers had been a paradox, shy in person yet fearless on stage. With Madame perched on his hand, he skewered celebrities, politicians, and social taboos with a venomous wit wrapped in sequins. Television welcomed him. Nightclubs adored him. Vegas showered him with applause. To the public, Flowers and Madame were inseparable, a duo of razor-sharp camp, outrageous humor, and a flair that belonged to no one else. He was praised as an innovator, a trailblazer, the man who gave voice to a puppet and through it, an entire community. But behind the wisecracks and neon spotlights, Flowers lived a quieter story. His health began to fail. His once boundless energy drained. His appearances, fewer and fewer. Audiences noticed Madame's sharp tongue was slower, her comebacks softer, the act somehow dimmer. The truth was whispered in clubs, speculated in tabloids, until finally it broke through the curtain. The disease that had already stolen so many in entertainment had come for Flowers too, stripping the life from the man whose art was all about illusion. The twist was bitterly ironic. The ventriloquist who had made a puppet seem alive was himself reduced to a fragile shell, unable to speak without pain, unable to keep up the illusion of endless laughter. His passing was not only the death of a performer, but the silencing of a cultural voice that had dared to mock society's hypocrisy. Madame, once outrageous and unstoppable, became suddenly still her silence, more shocking than any of her one-liners. When Wayland Flowers died, America lost more than a ventriloquist. It lost a jester who had held up a mirror and forced the powerful to laugh at themselves. His act may live on in memory, but without his sly grin behind it, the magic is gone. Number 11. Glenn Burke. In the spring of 1995, Oakland mourned not a politician nor a movie star, but a ball player who had once carried the promise of legend. At only 42, Burke's death was announced with little fanfare, a stark contrast to the roar of the crowds that once greeted him beneath stadium lights. Baseball had lost its first openly gay player, though the sport barely dared to whisper his name. Burke had been electric on the field, a swift outfielder with a powerful arm and the swagger of youth. He played for the Los Angeles Dodgers, then the Oakland Athletics, and carried himself with a charisma that drew teammates and fans alike. He was credited with inventing the high five, a gesture of triumph that spread like wildfire through sports. For a moment, he seemed destined to carve his name into the great pantheon of America's pastime. Yet beneath the uniform, Burke carried a truth too heavy for the era. His sexuality was an open secret in the clubhouse, whispered in corridors, glossed over by management. The Dodgers even offered him money to marry and mask his identity, an offer he refused with defiance and dignity. As his candor grew, his opportunities shrank. Traded, benched, and eventually pushed out, Burke's career ended not with a standing ovation, but with a silent door closing. The twist was merciless. After baseball abandoned him, Burke struggled in obscurity, battling poverty, drugs, and the very illness that would claim his life. The man who had once lifted teammates in celebration was himself left unsupported, drifting far from the diamond that had once defined him. By the time his diagnosis became public, The sport that should have honored him had already forgotten him. His funeral drew friends, family, admirers from the gay community, but few from the league that had benefited from his brilliance. When Glenn Burke died, baseball lost not just a player, but a pioneer. The high five he created still explodes across fields, stadiums, and playgrounds, yet its inventor rests in silence. His story remains both triumphant and tragic, a reminder that courage often comes at a cost. Number 12. Klaus Nomi. In the summer of 1983, New York's underground scene fell into stunned silence as its most bizarre and brilliant performer succumbed in a Manhattan hospital. At only 39, the German countertenor who had turned opera into cabaret and cabaret into cosmic theater was gone. The East Village that once pulsed with his alien arias now echoed with a chilling emptiness. Nomi had been a spectacle unlike any other. With a powdered face, painted lips, and costumes borrowed from science fiction, he looked like a visitor from another planet. His voice soared from angelic falsetto to operatic thunder, shocking audiences who did not know whether to laugh, cry, or simply stare. He performed with David Bowie on Saturday Night Live, crooned Puccini to wide-eyed punks, and made every stage his intergalactic playground. He was camp. He was avant-garde. He was unforgettable. Yet behind the mask of theatrical bravado, Nomi was fighting a private apocalypse. His health began to fail, his once powerful voice reduced to whispers, his otherworldly presence shrinking into fragility. The illness that haunted the city's nightclubs found him, as it had found so many others. Still, he continued to perform, appearing in his signature plastic tuxedo, even as his body withered beneath it. The tragedy deepened when whispers revealed that he was one of the first celebrities to be publicly identified with the disease, turning his decline into a spectacle of both fascination and fear. The twist was grotesquely poetic. The man who had fashioned himself as an alien outsider became a literal symbol of alienation, abandoned by friends, shunned by colleagues, reduced to an emblem of a crisis few dared to name. He died alone, surrounded not by the roar of applause but by the sterility of hospital walls. His stagecraft had promised immortality, but reality delivered only silence. When Klaus Nomi died, the underground lost its comet. His recordings remain eerie and ethereal, a strange blend of joy and lament that feels like both prophecy and requiem. His legacy is not just music, but the haunting image of an artist consumed by the very era he helped define. Number 13. Jobriath. In the summer of 1983, a small New York apartment became the final stage for a man once hailed as the first openly gay rock star signed to a major label. At only 36, Jobriath ended his life in obscurity, far from the glittering spotlight that had once promised him immortality. The city that had ignored his decline barely noticed his passing, and yet his absence spoke volumes. He had been a comet streaking across the early 70s, marketed as America's answer to David Bowie with the extravagance of cabaret and the swagger of rock. Album covers painted him as a living sculpture, concerts promised operatic spectacle, and his manager declared him the next Elvis, Sinatra, and Beatles rolled into one. The hype was deafening, the expectations impossible, the backlash swift. Critics scoffed, audiences hesitated, and within 2 years his career collapsed under the weight of its own ambition. Behind the stage, makeup and bombast, Jobriath was a musician of rare sensitivity. His voice carried both strength and fragility. His lyrics hinted at longing. His melodies revealed a heart beating behind the glitter. But as the disco ball turned and fashions shifted, he vanished from fame's radar. From stadium dreams, he retreated to a penthouse atop the Chelsea Hotel, where he played piano for pennies, a faded star still flickering in the shadows. The twist came with merciless irony. A man once promoted as larger than life was reduced to silence by a disease smaller than the eye could see. His illness was whispered about, dismissed, ignored, until it consumed him entirely. There was no farewell tour, no tribute concert, no curtain call, only the quiet passing of a man whose boldness had arrived too soon for a world unwilling to embrace it. When Jobriath died, rock lost more than a performer, it lost a pioneer. His legacy, buried for decades, has since been rediscovered, his records reissued, his story retold as a tale of talent, tragedy, and timing. He was the right star in the wrong era, punished for daring to be honest before honesty was allowed. Fame is fleeting, memory fragile, truth eternal. Subscribe to our channel to keep these stories alive so that voices like Jobriath's will never be forgotten again.